So, hi, Michelle. Welcome to the podcast.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
You're welcome. And I'm really excited for this conversation. And I know I always say that every week, but I really am because you have recently published the book Joyful Selling, which kind of sounds a little bit like an oxymoron, certainly to myself a few years ago. So I'm really interested to dive into what is joyful selling. How can we approach selling in a more feminine way, a way that feels comfortable? So I think this is going to be such a great conversation. But before we get to that, I'd love it if you could introduce yourself to the audience and explain a little bit about your journey. How did you get to where you are today?
Absolutely. I, like many coaches, I think, accidentally became a coach. And I definitely did not set out to teach people how to sell. Absolutely not. I was working for a coach training company selling their coaching services. And I was doing that for a few years and just having a ton of success. The business was growing. We were having an incredible time hosting these really heart-centered and life-changing calls. And the owner of the company was hosting a live event with participants, and she asked me to attend and speak for just 10 minutes. Now, if you know me, you know I'm very anxious. And even a 10-minute talk had me up for 3 nights. I could not sleep. And between you, me, and everyone listening on this podcast, I had to take a sleeping pill the night before so that I was rested and ready. And that 10 minutes came, and I stood up in front of about 100 people, and I started to share the work I did and the sales calls I hosted. And mind you, many people in the audience had been on a call with me, and it had been a life-changing experience for them. And after that 10-minute conversation where I shared what I did, it turned into 45 minutes. It went into lunch. There was a line out the door, and the owner of the company pointed across the room and screamed, "Hey, Michelle, you're coming back every year." And right then I knew that I had a gift and I had something that coaches, heart-centered coaches and service providers needed to learn in a different way. I could speak their language. I understood. I had witnessed them for years. I understood where they got stuck, and I was really able to help them. So I didn't mean to be a sales coach by any means, but I had stepped into this coaching world. And so that is how I got my start. And since then, I've helped hundreds of coaches sell millions of dollars of coaching and sell in a way that feels really aligned to them and is transformative to the client, even on that sales conversation, and sets a stage for success.
What a fantastic story. And I love what you just said there about these sales calls can be transformational. And I've seen it myself when you have these conversations and just help illuminate people's problems and challenge them to think differently about their situation. It is transformative. And suddenly, like, everything becomes possible for them. And you can do that in such a short space of time. These sales calls can be a real gift. But what was that like for you then, going from this company to starting up on your own as a sales coach? It feels like it was the natural step. You clearly had an audience that wanted that service. Was that quite an easy process?
No, not at all. It was not an easy process. And I was prepared, which is what actually really surprises me is I was educated about business, about marketing, about podcasts, about email, about Facebook ads. I had years of experience in all of these areas. And still, it was the rudest awakening. And I don't know if you had this experience, but I'm one person. And when you don't have a team, you simply can't do it all. I couldn't, it would takes me an entire day to write an email. I don't know about you, but I pour over every word and period and subject line. It to edit a podcast, right? It takes hours and hours. All of these things, it's just impossible. And I couldn't also deliver my services. So I actually was just really spinning my wheels and really found myself as I started my business working on what was urgent versus what was important. And so I got really stuck in the details, which I suspect many of your clients do and podcast listeners as well, in these details that don't bring you in the income, but keep you busy and feel like you're doing the work. So that was really the rudest awakening for me, was really, how do I get rid of the busy work and how do I focus on what's important, those big clients that bring me in the business. And then for me, the biggest shift was how I serve clients. So I actually couldn't serve clients one-to-one. I couldn't even serve them in a typical group situation. I have 3 kids, I have 2 dogs, I have a couple of mortgages, and it was just impossible. So I either had to close my doors or I had to rethink how I serve clients. And I found out how to do that. And now I serve clients exactly as I desire. And it's really working out.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm happy to share more about that later. But that was really the shift for me, was what's the make it or break it for me? I had to figure out how to run my business in a way that was sustainable and profitable for me.
Yeah, I think what you say there has been echoed on the show so many times. And myself, my background's marketing communications. So yeah, designing a amazing marketing plan was easy for me. It came very naturally, but then implementing it suddenly is like, oh my gosh, this is too big. I can't make this happen on my own. And like you, I was working with clients one-to-one, but I was burning out because it was so stressful. It was fine if everything went fine. But if one person wanted to move their meeting, it just suddenly, the house of cards collapsed. It just didn't work. So now I had to take on very few one-to-one clients and focus really on doing group coaching in a very different way, so that it doesn't feel like a group, it feels like one-to-one. So I feel comfortable with what I'm delivering, the quality of that, but it works for my lifestyle. But taking that step, it takes courage, because we don't necessarily see exactly how people are doing their business or how big a team they have or what's working for them. So figuring it out for yourself, it takes time, it takes courage, because you have to test things and you have to be prepared to fail. So what was that process like for you? How did you find the perfect balance and way of working?
Yeah, well, what's neat is actually, what I teach with the sales conversation came about because of these constraints. And I always think of an artist too, when you have these constraints on what you can use, you get really creative and innovative. And that's where great inventions and ideas come from. So, to answer your question, I thought about when do I feel my best? And funny enough, my work kind of always comes back to my minivan. And this is my quiet time in between the drop off. I have 3 young children. And this is actually how I started sales, was in my minivan. I would take calls in between preschool drop off, which is another story. But I started to think about, how can I both serve my ideal clientele, get them the results I want, but also it feels so light and amazing to me. And when I would get on group coaching calls, people would typically not have read my book or not have done the course material. The people who had done the course material, had read my book, they were out selling. And so, yeah, they would get on the sales call, they would get on the coaching call, but they wouldn't be the most engaged. And I thought, that's interesting. And then I thought about my clients that have gotten the best results. How had I served them, and what part of our work together really served them? And for me, it was actually Voxer support. And Voxer is an app that you can use. It's a walkie-talkie app. And they would listen to my course and they would read my book. And then they would ask me questions via the Voxer app. And I was able to troubleshoot. Hey, I got a maybe. What should I do? Or, hey, this client wouldn't take a second call with me for a week out. What do you suggest? Or, oh my gosh, that was the worst call ever. And Voxer is so light and easy to me. And I've taken hundreds of calls now. And that's just so light for me. For other people, that would drive them absolutely insane. But for me, I can answer your questions when I'm in my minivan. And I can get you this, amazing result for you. Why I'm out doing other things, I don't have to stop, schedule a call, have a group coaching meeting in order for you to get the support you need. And so I really also wanted it to be less expensive. I didn't want it to be a $20,000 program, although I love these masterminds. But I had managed those programs. I'd sold those programs, and I know all that goes into it. And it's, for me, 10 years from now, when my kids are older, it's not for me right now. So this is a way I can help new coaches, experienced coaches in a really light and inexpensive way. And it's almost as if I'm not working. It feels fantastic.
Yeah, I love that you clearly have given yourself permission to be curious and to test different things out and to say, oh, that's interesting, that's working, that doesn't work, and how can I fit in? And I remember when my kids were little, it was all about the pockets of time. And I had 5-minute strategies, 10-minute strategies and actions, and everything was broken down. The longest action I ever had was 30 minutes because I didn't really have that kind of time. Then I had 2 days a week where I actually had a full day. It was like till 3 o'clock in the afternoon, but I could do something juicy in those times. But everything else, I started on Twitter because that was nice and quick and easy. And it's all evolved now. And I love that you've already got that plan. Well, when I get to this stage, I know things will be different. I'll be able to show up differently. So I love that you've tested things and tried what's worked for you, even if it went against what other people are doing.
Yes. And I love a good beta program. And those are, for some reason, people always want to join a beta program. So even if you're an experienced entrepreneur, to launch a new program, a new way of working at, I always do 50% off and then it quickly goes up, which is nice for a beta program, is so much fun. And it takes the pressure off because you're, as the client, going to be a part of creating it too, which people seem to really enjoy as well.
Yeah. Your first clients aren't really clients, they're co-creators.
Absolutely.
They'll be there alongside you, testing things, giving you feedback, and they often become real advocates for your business going forward as well. I know many of the clients that I had right in the early days are still there supporting me now, and oh, this is happening, this is great, and feedback that they've seen. And yeah, it's a really nice relationships that you can build there.
Yeah, absolutely.
So let's move on to selling, the big topic from today. And before we move into joyful selling, or maybe this is part of it, you talk about feminine sales. Can you tell me what that means exactly?
Yeah, absolutely. So I have a story for everything, but I had an amazing coach. And in the middle of one of our calls, she paused and said, Michelle, you have a really masculine sales energy. And I got hot all over. I didn't understand what she meant. I thought perhaps she was insulting me. But then I took a deep breath and I paused and I thought, you know what? You are right. I am chasing clients. I'm following up constantly. I'm taking calls at all hours of the day, whatever works for the client, and I'm discounting. And all of these things took away my power and helped me. I didn't feel in control and it didn't feel good to me. So of course I didn't look forward to these calls. So when I thought about, okay, how do I want to feel at the end of a sales call? How do I want the other person to feel when they hang up the phone with me? I started to tap into more of a feminine sales energy where I set fierce boundaries and only took calls at date times that feel good to me. For me, it's 9 and 11 a.m. I feel rested and ready. I only take a couple of calls a day. I also take shorter calls. And I started just to tap into all of these things that feel good for all genders, right? But was really about receiving, meeting at the middle, not chasing, and so on and so forth till I dialed in the sales call that feels so amazing to me and is no longer about getting a yes. When we come to a sales call and we're tapping into a feminine energy, we don't work with everyone. We only work with clients that are really aligned with us. And so we show up to the sales call differently. So a lot of times people say, is feminine sales the opposite of bro marketing? And in one word, yes, it is. Absolutely.
Yeah. And I think, as you said there, feminine doesn't necessarily mean it's just for women. We all have male and feminine energy within us. So I like that you've tapped into this alternative way of doing it. So if the traditional sales call method doesn't feel good, it's really reassuring to know there is another approach. And one thing you said there is that your calls aren't all about getting a yes. So what are the objectives of your sales calls if you aren't aiming for a yes?
Yeah, absolutely. So if you think about when your intention as to how you approach any conversation is really important. So if you approach the sales conversation with a curiosity, and the goal of a sales conversation is, for me, and a feminine energy is really to seek out the truth. And oftentimes, the prospect doesn't know what the truth is. They don't know what they need support around, what they're struggling, what their dreams are. It's tapped in the recesses of their brain. And when you enter into a sales conversation looking forward to revealing what their desires are, what their dreams are, what their struggles are, not just surface level, what they give you, but really deeper, you do an incredible service for them and you find out what it is that they really desire. And that may or may not be you. And when you figure that out, most often the answer is you, and you can really help them see why. But if it's not, also, you can suggest someone else or gently release them into the universe. And that feels amazing every time as well. And we're training our brain here. And if it doesn't feel good every time, we're not going to do it. And we're not going to show up in a way. Zig Ziglar says sales is a transfer of energy. And that's so true. The words you say don't matter as much as how you feel on that call and the energy you're transferring to the other human being. So when you can really tap into that and really care, then magic happens on that sales call. Tears happen, transformation, and hot damn, the person's like, oh my gosh, I had no idea I wanted to start my own business or leave my spouse or stay with my spouse, right? I had no idea that came out of my mouth. And now you're, instead of fixing their problem, you're demonstrating the type of coach you are. And that is so attractive. And it really feels good. You may have heard people say sales is service. And what does that mean? This is what it means. When you serve the heck out of somebody and you help them make a decision, yes or no, this way or that, it's an incredible service. And that is our job as sales coaches, as coaches, helping somebody to step into our program or someone else's that we're selling.
Yeah, I love that. And I think, you know, we hear, as you said, we hear of sales as service, and Rich Litvin is always talking about serve them so powerfully they can't help but want to come back for more of that. And I love this idea of seeking out the truth. I think everyone listening has probably been on those sales calls where they're clearly following a script, and you get to the end, and yeah, their program does make sense, but you just don't feel it. You're like, yeah, but I know you've just put me through a system to get me to a yes, and it makes sense and everything, but I don't want to do this. It hasn't given me the information that I need to make a decision. And looking into what it takes to sell to women, for example, and as a woman, I know it really resonated with me, that we want to be part of an experience. We don't want to just be sold to and be told, oh, this is what's right for you. We want to be part of that. We want to have a conversation. We want to enjoy that whole experience. And the system the method that you're sharing really taps into that. And I think it sounds wonderful. Do you still follow a process to get to that result?
Absolutely. So it's so important that you follow a process. Absolutely. The process and the decision making, just like in a coaching conversation, to really help somebody come to an awareness and to take next steps, there's a process, and everybody has a little bit of a different framework to a coaching call. Now, a coaching call and a sales call differ in that a sales call, you're not ever trying to help them solve the problem. And I think that's a really big misnomer. And the fastest way to lose a sale is when you start coaching somebody around the problem that they're having. It's really counterintuitive. Do not try to fix or coach or lean into the problem and fixing the problem that they're having. Your goal in a sales conversation is to help them make a decision if they want to get help around that problem. So absolutely, I have a really tight framework that I teach. It's called the 5 steps to choice, right? Not getting somebody to a yes, but how do you help somebody to make a decision yes or no. And there's a real process to that. And there's real steps that you need to take in a certain order. You need to understand a client's problem before you help them tap into the vision of what it is that they want. And I also teach, for example, you want to do an embodiment exercise. You want to have somebody get out of their head and into their heart before they tap into that vision of what's possible. Otherwise, you're going to get these mundane answers like, I want to stay married, or I don't want to lose my job, or I want to pay the bills. And nobody pays you thousands of dollars for that. They pay you thousands of dollars to help them tap into that vision of what's possible. So a lot of times women, especially, we say, oh, we don't want to do that bro marketing sales conversation. We don't want to do that script. Don't get me wrong. You do need to learn the sales conversation, whether it's from you, from me, from anyone else that really aligns with you. Learn how to methodically bring somebody to a decision in a very short call, 100%.
I love that you touched on this idea of solving the problem. And I think particularly for people who are coaches or consultants, that's what they do. They solve people's problems. So it's hard not to go there. But I think what I always explain to my clients is that if you solve their problem on the call, you are really doing them a disservice, because they'll come away thinking, oh, I'm fixed now.
Yep.
But we all know they're not, because there's a lot more work to do. They've just got that next step. So it's hard because we all love to help, but not going there is really, really important. And you were talking about finding that truth, finding the real problem. And I think
yes,
because people, as you said, they don't know what their problem is. They think it's this, but often the problem has come a few steps before. There's a quote by, when I was writing my book, I was watching all of these writing masterclasses, and one was with Neil Gaiman, and he was explaining that when he has a problem with a character, it's never at that point that he can fix it. He has to go back a few chapters, and that's where the problem can be fixed. And I think it's the same with anyone we serve. They come with a problem, but that's not the source of the problem. It's a few steps deeper than that. So there's no way to that in a short sales call. So we have to remind ourselves, if we want to serve, we can't solve.
Oh, I love that. That's a great quote.
Yeah, that just came out.
It's so good. It's so good. If we want to serve, we can't solve. Oh, that's so good. You recommended a book on a previous podcast, and I was trying to look up the name, and it was about, if I know what to do, why aren't I doing it? Do you remember this book?
Yeah, that's Dr. Nick Hull.
Oh, and oh my gosh, they know what to do. I hate to break it to you, but all your clients have all the answers. They are perfectly whole and capable as they are. Our job as coaches, as consultants, is to help them focus, right? To help them take those next steps. And so when you go to solve their problem, one, they might feel like they're fixed and they move on and go do the thing, or they won't like what it is that you suggest that they do, or they're going to lean into those negative feelings about actually doing the tough work. And those negative feelings is a part of a coaching container, not a part of a sales conversation, right? We do want to tap into what feels uncomfortable and negative, but we want to move into what's possible and bridge that transformation. And so if you go into the part of their brains, especially right before you make an offer, of fixing, and they're like, oh, damn, I need to fix those Facebook ads, or, oh, goodness, I do actually have to talk to my spouse. And they start to lean into the uncomfortable instead of what's possible. And so it's really important. Yes, do not solve their problems on the sales conversation 100%.
Yeah. It's like you look at Virgin Holidays, and what they're actually selling you is long queues in an airport, bad food, like few hours in a tiny little tube flying through the air, possibly losing your luggage, hours in custom, screaming kids. That's what they're actually selling you. But that is definitely not what they talk about. They talk about nice sandy beaches and the memories, but they're not selling you a beach. That whole experience is something else altogether. So yeah, it's a good reminder that we're not selling the pain, the uncomfort that has to come with any kind of transformation, but the destination, that white sandy beach at the end of it.
Yeah. And that doesn't mean we don't tap into the pain. And a lot of times when we think about feminine sales, we think, oh, I don't want to twist the knife. I don't want to do any of that yucky stuff. And the truth is that coaches are truth tellers, and you shine a light on the yucky in your life. And that is such a gift. When you can, in a short conversation, help somebody understand the cost of marriage counseling. It cost me $500 a month when I added it all up, plus babysitting. And when you can help them understand that that's costing them almost 10 grand a year, right? You can really help them make a decision. Or when they've been passed over for a raise for 5 years, and the raise is $25,000 a year and they've missed out. That's a very real cost to not taking action and changing their life. So it's truly a disservice. There is nothing yucky or gross about not shining a light on the pain in someone's life, as long as you're doing it in a really loving way and you're helping them to understand the whole picture and how your work together is going to help impact and change their life.
Yeah. So we talked about earlier the challenge with coaching on the call, trying to solve people's problem. And you mentioned there that you are coming from a loving space. So you're really trying to help them for the right reasons, get into this truth, and, being fully prepared not to sell at the end of it if it isn't the right solution for them or the right person for you. But where's the line between showing up on a sales call and being really friendly and nice and being like chatty and a nice friend to this person, and then saying, do you want to buy this thing? I think a lot of people get stuck in this friend zone, and then it's hard to make that switch. So what's your advice there?
This is such a really, really good point. You do not want to fall into the friend zone. And there's many ways that you can do this. A lot is in the sales call setup itself. So when you set up the call and you set an intention and give a roadmap at the beginning of the conversation, you're really setting yourself up as a professional, and you're helping them understand the process that's going to take place. By hosting shorter calls, this helped me stay out of the friend zone. When you host an hour and a half sales conversation as a heart-centered coach, what's going to happen? You're going to let them go into story and go on and on and on about all the awful things that are going on in their life. But when you're hosting a proper aligned 45-minute sales conversation, you'll say their name and you'll break rapport and you'll keep the train on the tracks and keep it moving forward. So that is really the primary way that you can stay out of the friend zone, is staying in command of the call, not control where you're bossing them around and demanding they move on to the next thing, but really sitting up tall, being a leader, moving them forward onto the next step and guiding them through this process. You want a coach that is in command and can tell you to stop talking. We're going to move on to the next subject, or in a really loving way. And when you can have the skills to do that on a sales conversation, you can really stay out of the friend zone. For me, that and my clients, really, that 45 minutes can really help heart-centered coaches be prepared. If you're hosting a 45-minute sales conversation and you're watching the clock, you are prepared, you're bringing them through the steps, you're moving on, and you are keeping that train going. So yeah, that's what's really worked for me.
Love that advice. Thank you. And what happens at the end of a sales call? It's gone great. And then you get that question, you say, oh, is this something you're looking for help with? They're like, yeah, this is absolutely, it's all going great. Then you ask them to make that commitment and decide. And they say, oh, I want to think about it, or I need to discuss this with my husband, or whatever comes next. They're having this delaying at the end. How can we handle that? Is that normal? Is that okay? Or does it mean we've done something wrong?
Yeah, well, a little bit of both. First off, you should not get true objections at the end of the sales conversation, but you should get buying questions. So when you start to get questions like, oh my gosh, I don't know if I have the time. Oh, I have to talk to my spouse, or I'm not sure if I can afford this. You should celebrate. This is amazing. They are considering working with you. And these are buying questions. There are 4 main objections that come up time and time again. And during a heart-centered aligned sales conversation, you better have talked about them before. The first time you talk about money better not be at the end of the sales conversation. You should have talked about money very quickly into the sales conversation, what you've invested, what they've spent, what marriage counseling is costing them, what, being passed over for a raise has costed them. You should also know and have brought up the buying decisions, right? If it's a business, are you the owner of the company, or do you have somebody else that should be on this call with us? So this is really comes down to learning the sales conversation and knowing that in part of your job is to help them think through these decisions during the sales conversation, not at the end. So it's almost like I always think about my son Silas, and he always thinks that there's monsters under the bed. And if I look under that bed and I go, Silas, there are no monsters. There is nothing to be afraid of. Be quiet and go to bed. They get bigger and bigger and bigger, and he needs a nightlight and a spotlight. But if I look under the bed, which I do all the time, and I go, oh, I see them. Come, how can we scare them away? And we talk about how we can get rid of those monsters. Poof, they're gone, and he falls asleep and has a great night. So not talking about or shedding a light on these objections or these gremlins just makes them bigger and bigger and bigger. But instead, when you can be really confident and practiced and talk about them during a sales conversation, when the spouse objection comes up, you'll know exactly what to say. And you'll also oftentimes, these are a scapegoat for a question or an objection about the program itself. So we can move those objections aside and say, tell me about this program and what feels good to you and where you might have some questions. As a coach and as a sales coach, you get really good at hearing the words underneath the question. And so you get really, really practiced at that. I always reference my kids, but my son says, I hate you, Mom, I hate you. What is he really saying? He's saying, I'm upset. I need a hug. I need some quiet time. I need some attention. And that's the same thing on a sales conversation. When they say, I can't afford it, let's translate that. I'm not sure if this program is for me. I feel uncertain. I don't know if this will work. So when you dive in and you start to answer their objection, you're not actually having a real conversation about the actual problem. So this is getting really long-winded, and there's much more to this, but it's mostly important that you are practiced and learned in hosting a heart-centered sales conversation. And then when those objections do come, that your heart doesn't start to beat, you're practiced, you take a deep breath, you celebrate them, and you lean in and dig into the question underneath the question.
Yeah, I love that idea of celebrating those objections, because that's the moment where we can feel we've done something wrong, or we need to start pushing, or we get a bit defensive. So I like the idea of celebrating and then exploring further. Well, what's the real question here? What's the real challenge?
Yes.
Tell us about your book, Joyful Selling. Does that go into more of this detail of the conversation and the process?
Yes, absolutely. This is just an incredible resource for new and experienced coaches. I have had brand new coaches tell me they love this book, as well as coaches that have been in the business for 7 years and say, I wish I had this back when. It's not what you think. You will read this book and laugh and cry and go, no way, this is not possible. It's really, really fun. And I poured my whole heart and soul into it. But just this conversation we're having here I actually have a chapter that's called Celebrating Objections. So how do we think differently? And how does a trained salesperson, which it's okay to be, you're selling your services, that's okay. How do they hear what somebody's really saying when they say, I have to ask my spouse? Or I'm not sure if I can afford this. How do you respond? How do you bring this up in the sales conversation previous? And how do you take those next steps forward? Our brains are going crazy, and they're going to find any excuse not to move forward. We want to stay in homeostasis right where we are, even if it's bad. It's what we know. And so breaking out of that mold takes a really not experienced coach, but a trained coach to help your client take those next steps. So absolutely, Joyful Selling is an incredible resources that all life coaches, health coaches, service providers can really benefit from.
Wonderful. Great. Thank you so much for sharing a little bit more about that. And I'm certainly going to get a copy myself too.
Yeah, thanks so much. Yeah, you can grab it on Amazon.
So is there anything that we haven't touched on today that you think, if people are going to take that next step towards starting to have more success with their sales call, feeling more natural, not aiming for yes, but aiming to reveal the truth, is there anything that you think actually they need to know this before they make that next step?
I would really invite everyone in to learn the sales conversation, of course. But then I also just invite you to, before every sales call, close your eyes, sit down, think about the human being on the other side of that call, and think about how do you want them to feel? How do you want to feel during this time together? And then enter that conversation with that energy, getting really curious. And it will feel amazing. It might not go just as planned, but you'll have impacted somebody's life forever. And you can host sales calls that your clients remember for the rest of their life. And that is such a special gift. And I'm happy to be able to share that with you.
Wonderful. What a great note to end on. Michelle, thank you so much for sharing all your wisdom with us today and helping us to think differently about sales calls. And I think a lot of people are going to be feeling much more relaxed going into a sales call, knowing that it's all about how you could make the other person feel, how you want to feel, how you're going to help them find that truth and make the right decision for them without the pressure. I think it's a very different way of thinking, and to say it's not just about selling to women or being a woman who's selling. It's for everybody who wants a more authentic approach, I think. So thank you so much. If people want to know more about you, obviously they can get your book, Joyful Selling, on Amazon, but where else can they find you?
Yes, you can find me. You're listening to a podcast right now. So Joyful Selling as a life coach, head on over there. And I drop tips there. I'm actually relaunching it in the next month here. So you'll have a ton of episodes to listen to give you these heart-centered tips as you host sales calls and sell your coaching.
Fantastic. Michelle, thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you so much. This has been so wonderful. You're doing such amazing work for women, and I'm so happy to be here. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us today. I hope you took away as much value as I did. If you enjoyed the show, then I would love it if you could leave a review on iTunes to help more women find the show and benefit from the incredible business building wisdom shared. And encourage more women to rise alongside you by sharing this podcast with your business besties. There are many more tools, tips, and insights coming up for you in the next episode, so don't miss next week's show, or better still, subscribe now so you never miss your weekly dose of inspiration. And remember to follow my free training the free training I've created for you to help you communicate, market, and sell your true value with greater confidence, ease, and joy. You'll find it at melittacampbell.com/training. I've been your host, Melitta Campbell, and I look forward to meeting you again in the next episode.